Canada awoke to political chaos this morning after Quebec Premier Jean-François Ducharme announced that the province would hold a binding referendum on full independence from Canada next spring. The stunning declaration, delivered in a fiery speech before Quebec's National Assembly, sent shockwaves through the country, triggering economic jitters and fiery political responses from coast to coast. "This is not about division," Ducharme said in French, addressing a roaring crowd waving Quebec flags outside Parliament in Quebec City. "This is about destiny, Quebec's right to chart its own future, free from Ottawa's control." Within hours, Prime Minister Justin Wallace called an emergency meeting of his cabinet in Ottawa. Sources inside the Prime Minister's office described the mood as alarmed and deeply uncertain, with senior ministers warning of national unity at its most fragile point in decades. Markets reacted swiftly. The Canadian dollar fell nearly 2% against the US dollar in early trading, while bond markets showed signs of volatility. Political analysts compared the move to the 1995 referendum, but said this time, the situation was more volatile. "What's different now is timing," explained Dr. Elaine Morin, a political scientist at McGill University. "Canada is still recovering economically from global inflation shocks and population strain. The federal government is stretched thin, and Quebec knows it." In Montreal, thousands poured into the streets, some cheering, others protesting. Banners reading "Vive le Québec libre" fluttered alongside Canadian flags. Police maintained a tense but calm presence. Meanwhile, Indigenous leaders in northern Quebec issued cautious statements, reminding the government that sovereignty cannot proceed without respect for First Nations treaties. As night fell, uncertainty hung over the country. Provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan expressed fears of a domino effect, while opposition leaders in Ottawa accused the government of ignoring warning signs. "This is not just about Quebec," said Conservative leader Andrew de Vries. "This is about the future of Canada itself and how weak leadership got us here." The coming days are expected to bring heated debate in Parliament, market anxiety, and growing questions over whether Canada can hold itself together as Quebec takes its boldest step yet toward breaking away. The capital was on high alert Monday evening as the federal government scrambled to contain the fallout from Quebec's shocking announcement of a binding independence referendum. Inside the historic Langevin block, lights burned late into the night while Prime Minister Justin Wallace convened a closed-door emergency meeting with his cabinet, senior intelligence officials, and provincial representatives. According to insiders, the tone of the meeting was tense and urgent. "There's panic in the air," said one senior staffer who spoke on condition of anonymity. "They're not just talking about political damage, they're talking about national disintegration." Sources confirm that federal ministers discussed possible constitutional measures to delay or block the referendum, including an appeal to the Supreme Court and emergency legislation under the Clarity Act. But legal experts warned such a move could inflame Quebecers further and risk violent unrest. Across Ottawa, demonstrations broke out near Parliament Hill. Pro-unity protesters waved red and white flags and sang "O Canada," while smaller pro-separation groups gathered nearby, chanting freedom for Quebec. Police formed barricades as tempers flared. Finance Minister Rachel Armstrong issued a late-night statement attempting to calm investors. "Canada remains one of the most stable democracies in the world. We will defend the integrity of our nation and the rights of all citizens." Despite her words, the Toronto Stock Exchange is expected to open sharply lower on Tuesday, with early futures already pointing to significant losses in banking and energy sectors. Economists warn that even the talk of separation could trigger a wave of uncertainty for investors, immigration, and trade. Meanwhile, Quebec's announcement has drawn immediate international attention. French President Emmanuel Delaunay expressed respect for Quebec's democratic process, while the U.S. State Department released a cautious statement affirming America's strong support for a united, prosperous Canada. Behind the scenes, federal officials are reportedly preparing contingency plans for the possibility of a yes vote, including economic transition models, emergency security coordination with NATO, and even potential relocation of federal institutions out of Montreal. In the House of Commons, opposition leader Andrew de Vries accused Wallace of sleepwalking into a national crisis, demanding that the government draw a clear red line against separatist ambitions. But within Quebec, the Premier's office doubled down. "The era of half measures is over," declared a spokesperson for Duchamp. Quebec will stand on its own, no matter what Ottawa threatens. Analysts warn that Canada could be entering its most volatile political period since the 1970 October crisis, but this time, the threat is not from extremists, but from within its own federation. The nation now waits for the Prime Minister's address, expected Tuesday morning, a speech that could define whether Canada's unity holds or unravels. A somber and visibly tense Prime Minister Justin Wallace addressed the nation this morning from the steps of Parliament Hill, as millions of Canadians tuned in to watch what has already been described as the most consequential speech of his career. Standing before a row of Canadian flags under a grey autumn sky, Wallace's voice carried both resolve and exhaustion. Canada was built on unity, diversity, and strength in togetherness, he declared. Quebec is a vital part of who we are. We will not let division tear apart the country we love. The address came just 24 hours after Quebec Premier Jean-François Duchamp's explosive call for a binding independence referendum, a move that has thrown the nation into political turmoil. The Prime Minister announced the creation of a National Unity Task Force, comprised of representatives from every province and Indigenous nations, to open what he called an emergency dialogue for reconciliation and reform. He also urged calm, appealing to Quebecers not to give in to anger or despair. However, not everyone was convinced. In Quebec City, Premier Duchamp swiftly dismissed Wallace's address as empty Federalist theatre. Speaking to reporters, he said, "Ottawa has had 50 years to listen to Quebec's aspirations. They have chosen control over compromise. This time, we choose ourselves." The public reaction across Canada was immediate and deeply divided. In downtown Montreal, thousands gathered in Place des Arts, watching the speech on giant outdoor screens. Some cheered Wallace's call for unity, while others booed and waved blue and white fleur-de-lis flags in defiance. In Toronto, commuters paused in cafes and subway stations as screens displayed the live broadcast. "It feels like history repeating," said one bystander, referencing the 1995 referendum. "But this time, it's scarier, it feels real." On social media, hashtags #SaveCanada and #FreeQuebec trended simultaneously, showing just how split public opinion has become. Political commentators warned that the online battle could fuel further polarization, as misinformation and nationalist rhetoric began to circulate rapidly across both English and French platforms. Meanwhile, premiers from Alberta, British Columbia, and Manitoba held a joint press conference supporting the Prime Minister's unity plan but demanded that any national dialogue include discussions on federal reform, equalization payments, and constitutional fairness. "If Ottawa bends for Quebec, it must bend for all of us," said Alberta Premier Sarah Donnelly. Internationally, the reaction was cautious. The European Union called for restraint and respect for democratic norms, while the United Kingdom, itself no stranger to separatist tensions, offered to share expertise in managing national referendums. Despite his emotional appeal, analysts say Wallace's address may have come too late. "Quebec's independence movement has momentum," said political analyst Dr. Morin of McGill University. "Once people start believing separation is possible, it becomes very hard to pull them back." As the sun set over Ottawa, the country remained on edge. The Prime Minister's plea for unity had reached every home, every screen, every heart, but whether it would be enough to stop Quebec's march toward independence remained an open question. 2 days after Quebec's shock declaration of independence referendum and a day after Prime Minister Wallace's appeal for unity, the streets of several Canadian cities have erupted into the largest wave of demonstrations in decades. Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver all witnessed massive rallies, some peaceful, others spiraling into chaos as tensions between pro-unity and pro-independence groups boiled over. In downtown Montreal, an estimated 120,000 people filled René Lévesque Boulevard, waving Quebec flags and chanting, "Notre avenir, notre choix," "Our future, our choice." The mood began festive but quickly shifted when counter-protesters carrying Canadian flags arrived. Riot police formed barricades as fireworks and bottles were thrown, forcing authorities to deploy tear gas by nightfall. "This is not violence, this is frustration," said Sophie Laramie, a young demonstrator draped in the fleur-de-lis. "We've been told to wait for decades. Now Quebec finally has the courage to stand up." But not all Quebecers agree. In nearby Laval, hundreds of residents held a candlelight vigil for unity, holding signs that read "Stronger Together." One elderly man told reporters he lived through the 1995 vote and never imagined living through this nightmare again. In Ottawa, the federal government remained on crisis footing. Sources inside the Privy Council office confirm that federal police and intelligence agencies have been ordered to monitor extremist activity after online chatter suggested potential sabotage or violence against federal properties in Quebec. Meanwhile, Canada's major media networks are under fire for alleged bias. Quebec's French-language networks have been accused of giving disproportionate airtime to pro-independence voices, while English media in Toronto have been criticized for painting Quebecers as reckless separatists. Social media, flooded with misinformation and conspiracy theories, has only amplified the divide. In Toronto, thousands gathered in Nathan Phillips Square in solidarity with the Unity movement, singing "O Canada" as the CN Tower was lit in red and white. Yet, many there expressed exhaustion and disbelief. "I never thought I'd see the country falling apart in my lifetime," said teacher Mark Anderson. "We thought these debates were history. Turns out, they were only sleeping." The economic toll is mounting fast. Major banks have reported increased withdrawals and stock sell-offs, while international investors begin to question the stability of Canadian markets. The Bank of Canada held an emergency session, signaling it may intervene to prevent a currency collapse if instability continues. In Quebec City, Premier Duchamp remained defiant, accusing Ottawa of fearmongering and economic blackmail. He announced that the official Referendum Act will be tabled in the National Assembly within the week, setting a firm date for the vote, March 17, 2026. "The countdown has begun," Duchamp told supporters, his speech broadcast live across Quebec. "For the first time in our history, we will decide if we are a people or a province." Across the border, the United States issued a rare travel advisory urging caution for Americans visiting Canada, citing civil unrest and transportation disruptions. As night descended over Montreal, the scent of smoke and tear gas lingered. The city that once symbolized coexistence had become the flashpoint of a nation in crisis, and with 5 months to go until the referendum, the battle for Canada's soul had only just begun. As Canada reels from days of unrest, the aftershocks are now being felt across the world. Global markets, foreign governments, and international media outlets are watching closely as Quebec's push for independence transforms from a domestic crisis into a geopolitical flashpoint. The Canadian dollar has continued its free fall, now down 5% since Premier Jean-François Duchamp's referendum announcement. Major corporations, including several headquartered in Montreal, have frozen new investments and hinted at possible relocation if political uncertainty persists. "We can't make business decisions in a divided country," said Marie Tremblay, CEO of a Quebec-based tech firm. "No one knows what the rules will be 6 months from now." The United States, Canada's largest trading partner, has adopted a wary tone. Secretary of State Linda Price told reporters in Washington, "We support a strong and united Canada. Any transition must occur peacefully and democratically." Behind the scenes, diplomatic cables reveal U.S. concerns about border controls, trade disruptions, and potential ripple effects on North American security agreements. Meanwhile, the European Union issued a joint statement emphasizing respect for democratic principles, but several European nations, including Spain and Belgium, privately expressed fear that Quebec's referendum could embolden separatist movements within their own borders. In Quebec itself, the push for sovereignty is far from universally supported. A quiet but growing backlash has begun among moderate Quebecers, Indigenous leaders, and business owners. In the northern region of Nunavik, Inuit communities declared they would not recognize Quebec's independence without prior consultation, warning they may seek self-governance if Quebec breaks away from Canada. "We will not trade one master for another," said Peter Aglukak, spokesperson for the Nunavik Regional Council. "If Quebec leaves Canada, then Nunavik will leave Quebec." Inside Quebec City, the unity fissures are widening. Prominent Quebec Liberal and business leaders have begun to form a cross-party coalition called Stay Quebec, Stay Canada, pledging to campaign aggressively for the no vote in the upcoming referendum. Their argument: Quebec can preserve its language, culture, and identity within Canada rather than apart from it. But Premier Duchamp's movement still holds the upper hand. Recent polls show 52% of Quebecers leaning toward independence, the highest level of support ever recorded. His rhetoric has only grown sharper. Canada fears our strength because they know we can thrive without them, Ducharme thundered during a rally in Trois-Rivières. They take our taxes, dictate our policies, and call it unity. Enough is enough. Economists are warning of an impending crisis if the political standoff continues. International investors are pulling billions from Canadian markets, and real estate in Montreal is plunging. The Bank of Canada is reportedly preparing an emergency liquidity package to stabilize financial institutions if volatility escalates. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Wallace faces mounting pressure from opposition parties, who accuse him of weakness and indecision. A senior government source described the Prime Minister as isolated and exhausted, torn between defending Canada's constitution and avoiding actions that could ignite further separatist anger. For ordinary Canadians, the tension is suffocating. Truck convoys have been halted at interprovincial borders due to protests, food shipments have slowed, and airlines are reporting spikes in flight cancellations to and from Quebec. Across Canada, one sentiment echoes from Vancouver to Halifax, a mixture of disbelief and dread. The unthinkable, the breakup of Canada, no longer feels impossible. And as the March referendum draws closer, the world begins to ask a question that Canada itself seems afraid to face. What if Quebec really leaves? The sun rose over a tense and divided Quebec this morning as millions headed to polling stations in what has been called the most consequential vote in Canadian history. After months of political turmoil, economic anxiety, and mass protests, the moment of decision has finally arrived. Should Quebec become an independent country? Long lines formed outside schools, community centres, and city halls before dawn. Security was heavy, with federal police quietly monitoring key locations to prevent unrest. The atmosphere was both electric and anxious, a mixture of pride, fear, and disbelief. "This is our future, no one else's," said Claudine Roy, a 27-year-old nurse in Quebec City, clutching her ballot. "I'm voting yes because I want Quebec to stand on its own feet." Across town, others expressed deep concern. "I'm voting no because I don't want to lose my country," said Jacques Pelletier, a retired teacher. "We built this nation together. I can't imagine tearing it apart." By mid-afternoon, voter turnout had already surpassed 80%, breaking records from the 1995 referendum. The rest of Canada watched in silence as news networks broadcast scenes of Quebecers casting their votes, streets draped in blue and white flags, and federal leaders urging calm. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Wallace remained behind closed doors, receiving hourly updates from intelligence and election monitors. According to insiders, the government had contingency plans ready for either outcome, including emergency economic stabilization and constitutional negotiations with the provinces. The atmosphere in Montreal's Place des Arts was like a festival. Tens of thousands gathered for live coverage on massive outdoor screens, waving flags, singing anthems, and chanting Quebec Libre. Yet in the shadows, federal supporters huddled quietly in cafes, fearing the worst. At 10:30 p.m., after nearly 16 hours of voting, Quebec's chief electoral officer announced preliminary results. The crowd fell silent as the numbers appeared on screens. Yes, 50.8%. No, 49.2%. For a few seconds, there was only disbelief. Then the plaza exploded in cheers, tears, and fireworks as Premier Jean-François Ducharme stepped onto the balcony of the National Assembly, his voice shaking with emotion. "Tonight, Quebec is free," he declared. "We have chosen our path, our identity, our nationhood." In Ottawa, the reaction was starkly different. A pale-faced Prime Minister Wallace appeared before the nation just before midnight. His words were heavy and deliberate. "Tonight, we face a new reality. I respect the democratic will of Quebec, but I speak now for the millions of Canadians who are heartbroken. We will engage with Quebec to ensure an orderly transition, and we will protect the rights of all who wish to remain part of Canada." Across Canada, scenes of grief and disbelief unfolded. People wept openly in Toronto and Halifax. Western premiers called for an emergency national summit, warning that Canada's federation must be restructured or risk further unraveling. The world reacted instantly. Global markets plunged overnight, the US dollar surged, and major powers called for calm. The United Nations offered to mediate discussions on Quebec's transition to independence. But even within Quebec, cracks began to show. Indigenous communities in the north declared their intent to remain within Canada, refusing to be part of an independent Quebec without new treaties. Montreal's business leaders warned of economic collapse unless negotiations moved swiftly and peacefully. As dawn broke on March 18, 2026, Canada stood forever changed. The maple leaf still flew above Parliament Hill, but one of its defining stars had chosen to shine alone. "This is not an ending," Wallace said in his closing statement. "It is the start of two nations learning how to live apart without forgetting that they were once one." The world watched in awe as Canada, the land known for peace and unity, entered the uncertain dawn of separation, hoping that history's newest nation, the Republic of Quebec, could find freedom without forsaking friendship.